right, first, please introduce yourself.
My name is Bill Mutz, and I'm mayor of the city of Lakeland.
Okay, tell us a little bit about what you do. What I know different cities, the mayor has some different responsibilities from others, but what does the mayor of Lakeland do?
So the way we work is a commission that is governance and a city manager that heads the staff, which I really think is super appropriate for cities that are under 750,000 to 1 million people, because it is a very effective way to make sure that staff has continuity with the employees, and the governance, which can change from 4-year period to 4-year period, doesn't negatively influence that continuity. When you get to be 1 million people-ish as a city, you can't be very efficient doing that, and that really is when you create more of a strong mayor scenario.
I was going to ask you about that.
Yeah, and because size makes it necessary to make decisions faster. We have, this is a great city, and the structure is a great structure, and I really work hard to protect that structure at the present time, because we're 120,000 people within the city limits, and we are 120 to 130, somewhere in there, because of the growth rate, and we are 320,000 people that have Lakeland addresses. So a large portion of our city lives outside of city limits, but are certainly Lakeland addresses, Lakeland Electric customers, and Lakeland Electric is the largest enterprise fund that the city has in terms of producing income instead of just taking that income. And so that's, enterprise funds are limited to things like electrical, water, utilities, trash. The airport has a lot of facilities so that they can collect rent at the airport. So those kinds of things are things that actually create money for the city outside of taxes. And our goal in all of those things is to be break even or near, so that you can have slight reserves from one year to the next to absorb expenses. But you don't, that way it provides a great value for the citizens, but it is also something that is self-sustaining as we go forward.
So is it hard to ever build up a really big surplus?
Yeah, we don't live in a time where surpluses are built, and you really, it's different from a profit in a business. I'm a former business entrepreneur, and so the way you have to treat taxpayers' money and their assets, and the way you treat your own to create more profit are two different worlds. I could make as a private businessman a decision to try and create whatever surpluses in the business or profits in the business I want. Here we really try not to be excessive in reserves beyond what might be called upon for some kind of a natural disaster. So a hurricane that takes place, many times you will read about Key West went bankrupt from the hurricane damage that they had, and that's because they don't have enough reserves in the process. We are an A-rated Moody's city, which means our borrowing power is extremely positive, and so our interest rates are low. And so we have internal funds that we bond out and create, and those are designed to be low interest so that when we have something we do have to borrow for, we can do that with beyond our reserves. We can do that within those notes. And so we typically don't ever borrow beyond our reserves. Our reserves protect us all the time. That's why we're an A-rated city. We have the property taxes alone are insufficient, that we gain from every citizen whose houses live here, are insufficient to pay just for our LPD expense, our Lakeland Police Department expense. So property taxes are one component of what we raise, but the dividend we get from Lakeland Electric, which is payment, a payment that comes in lieu of taxes, would be, if it were a private utility, Lakeland Electric, that profit would go to the investors. We turn around and put it right back into the city. It pays for the rest of our fire and all other kinds of things, and that is actually, that component, those two components together are primarily the way we fund our general fund.
Is it unique for a city to own its own electric company?
Yes. So there's, I think, somewhere around 1,400 of them nationwide that where you own your own utility. They're called munis, municipal utilities. And then their investor-owned utilities are what you see typically. So that's Duke, most across the country. Texas is primarily, for example, all investor-owned. And it causes some difficulties because you worry about your grid and not necessarily the grid of someone else around you and how those interface. If you've seen the Disney ears on I-4, that is where Orlando Utilities, which is privately owned by the city, their city, and Lakeland Electric connect. And that's because electricity is unique. When you make it, you have to take it somewhere, and there isn't any way to store it and wait for later in the day. So we watch each other's production rates and our own demands on an ongoing basis with control rooms that are always required by law to be at least 10%, but more closer to 15% above what the current utilization is, so that if people go home and start turning air conditionings on, you can move into that because you can't create electricity instantly. So then watching each other's, we know that if they're starting to go down, we can borrow some of that electricity, and then we settle at the end of the month on who used the most, which direction, and write a check. And so that's one of the ways that we also add to the efficiency of Lakeland Electric. We took away our coal plant, which was a very, very big change, and we replaced, and a coal plant would take almost 3 days to come up to enough heat to be able to produce electricity, and it was 257 megawatts of power that came out of that plant. We ended up putting in Rice engines, 6 of them, which are engines that weigh 680,000 pounds apiece. So they came over on ships from Germany, and we've lined those 6 up. Those create power in 2 to 3 minutes, because you start the engine, you get it warmed, you turn it on, and you instantly have juice. So those can allow us to peak quickly into things that we need to do and then turn them back off as we go on. And that's one of 18 departments in the city. So you've got to, it's very complicated when you start to get into what are some of the things we're responsible for. That's why staff is so important for continuity and for changes and planning and visioning and implementation. Having governance that thinks that way and works that way is important for direction.
How is solar panels? Is that affected?
Solar panels are interesting because we all think, gosh, they're wonderful, and you've seen an array put across Florida that are crazy in the last 2 or 3 years. But solar panels are productive in Florida, and this is a state that it's the sunshine state. Lots of sun, about 35% of the day. They're just not as productive. So the PV cell, the photovoltaic cell itself, is much more productive than it used to be. It's almost twice as productive as when they were originally created, but they still create only about 17% of our power mix. And so wind is almost dead because wind is very unproductive relative to its carbon footprint, and so you're going to watch that industry just kind of close quietly. PV cells and solar are popular, but you have to produce electricity. We will watch in the next 10 years, and this isn't me being prophetic, it's just going to happen. Many nuclear reactors be placed all around the country, and that's the most effective way we can create electricity by far. In fact, I think just recently in Colorado, central Colorado, Aurora, they have just opened up the first mini nuclear reactor that uses spent fuel, nuclear fuel, to power it, and that has enough energy left in it for another 100 years for that reactor. And that, so you're not sourcing anything from anywhere else. It's just how do you control and contain that with the safety measures that you have to avoid the 3 Mile Islands, and those things that took place where they were horrifically just the perfect storm for catastrophe. If you do the right things to make nuclear reactors work, and especially if they're smaller size, they become affordable for utilities, both private and munis, as well as the practical way in which to power the grid for growth.
How long before you think oil and gas is not an option?
Well, I like this parallel, which is, so we're talking about when do we run out of oil? We probably run out of oil about 100 years from now. So it isn't near term. And and gas. The real issue is that as long as that remains such an inexpensive source, relatively speaking, because of its availability and the infrastructure that is in place already to be able to use it, it will take trillions of dollars to replace it with hydrogen or something else that we would have to create all of the infrastructure for. So it's the cheapest. I love this parallel. I heard an economist one time say, imagine you had a warehouse full of, what's the nut that starts with a P that's always good?
A peanut?
No, beyond P. Peanuts.
Pistachio?
Pistachios. I like this example because imagine you have pistachios and you have a warehouse full of them. That's our fuel and oil, okay? As long as you can go in and grab enough pistachios to have a handful to eat and you throw your shells back into that same warehouse, you're going to keep eating pistachios. You keep digging around, you may have to go deeper in there to get them from time to time, but at some point in time you can't get to pistachios. At some point in time it's too much work to sort through all the shells to be able to get there. That's when the cost starts to rise. That's when you create an opportunity for something else to become more cost effective. And I think that's a great parallel. We've got a ton of pistachios left. And so while we do, we're going to use them up.
Okay. I want to talk a little bit about your background, where you came from. Can you discuss a little bit about your earlier life?
Sure. My background is I grew up as a farm boy in Indiana and got into the warehousing business when I graduated from college. I was a finance and marketing major, and then when I went to in that business, I was involved in automotive distribution, truck parts distribution, and then service centers that went alongside that. And then was also a Sony distributor in distribution. We were a 7-state area Sony distributor. I was in a partnership with 5 other guys, and Sony Corp of America actually turned the distributors off all on one day on an annually renewable contract. One my grandfather held up and said, I'd never do this business because it's annually renewable. And I said, Grandpa, they've done this for 35 years. They're not going to not do that, not renew a contract. Well, he was right. They didn't. And that's because we had things like Best Buys that had come into place, and they didn't need to have distributors that were sending consumer electronic products to different cities. People would go to the big box store and buy them, and that took that whole piece of profit out, or expense for Sony, and they were able to either keep it or at lower prices. So coming out of the distribution business, I have a lot of appreciation for logistics, but I also had gotten involved on the truck parts side and truck services. So I had some background on heavy-duty servicing of trucks, and so that made me think about doing something automotively and purchasing a dealership, which I tried to do in Indianapolis and couldn't, and then bought one in Lakeland, Florida, a little place down in Florida, and that's what brought me here. And so for 18 years, we were Ford, Mazda, Hyundai, and Isuzu and Genesis dealer that we sold. And none of my 12 kids wanted to get in that business, and so when I realized I didn't have a next generation, I said, then I'm going to sell a business. After that, I was really working as a consultant, and then a group of businessmen in Lakeland asked me to consider running for mayor, which I wouldn't have done on my own, but I've loved the last 8 years of being able to serve the city. It's been a privilege.
And then you decide not to run for a third term?
I decided not to run for a third term because I've got 40 grandkids and I'm 72, and if I'm going to spend the time with those grandkids that I need to spend, I need to be doing it now. And so it was a hard decision for me because I love serving the city, and I think there's the way you want to do a job like this is to recognize you're a public servant, not a politician. And so I never look at this role politically. I look at this role in terms of what's best for the city, listening well to people, trying to figure out how we find the middle ground to accomplish what we need to get done, and then triage the importance and the availability of funds and make the best decisions possible.
So how does someone who's a father have 12 kids do time management? Because that must have been pretty tough.
I'm a good time manager. So I'm basically a 5 o'clock a.m. to 11 p.m. guy, and I don't do a lot of crash and burn. And so what would crash and burn be to me? That's going to be time on the internet, that's going to be time watching television, that's going to be time doing sports. So I'm very low knowledge on sports, very low involvement on sports unless it was our kids' or grandkids' sports. Those are the sports we did. And my ideal Saturday would be 4 of our kids playing on soccer fields that are right next to each other, and I could be at the corner cheering them. My wife would be one of the coaches. And so she was a phys ed major, so she makes up for that whole deficiency for me on that side of the equation. But I use my time pretty intentionally all the time. And I am driven hard by calendar. I leave enough time to play, and when we play, we unplug, and we unplug from everything. And so that's been an important part. Work hard first, play later. And if you do that, then you can play smarter.
What was your first job as a kid?
I originally worked on a farm, and the biggest job I had early on was in 8th grade, and I started building a 1.5 mile of board fence. Was paid 50 cents an hour, and it was through woods and hills, and very difficult to do. It was for horses, and took a 1.5 years, and lots of posts being tipped, lots of boards being measured and cut, lots of post holes being dug with a little Ford tractor that, an old 4-cylinder Ford tractor that would break the shear pin all the time, getting stuck on a root and then having to dig that out and get it out so you could finish putting the fence in. But then when we got that all done, then I painted that fence. And so just a lot of farm work, cutting grass and just making it pasturable for horses.
What was the first car you drove, and what was the first car you owned?
Yeah, so first car I drove was a Jeep. What year was that? I think it was probably a 1970 Jeep, and I got to paint it with a buddy a man I knew who was older than me, but he was, probably 18 or 20, who showed me how to do body work and how to lay down the paint, and I couldn't do it like he could do it, so he would let me do early coats and then he'd finish it right. But it was a wonderful experience because you could take it apart. A Jeep's fun because you can pop the top and have it, have no sides on it, and we just had a lot of fun with that. The first car I owned ended up being a Acura vehicle, and that was one because I had company cars as I worked for companies, because I was an outside salesman for many years for those companies. And then the Acura I bought was a 2-door coupe, and then we bought my wife a 4-door Skylark, Buick Skylark. After that, my wife started having to have bigger cars. We went to a station wagon, and then we went to a minivan, and then we went to an Expedition, and then we went to a 15-passenger cargo van, which is what she drove most of the years of the kids being larger, because by the time you throw soccer gear and stuff in and pick up 2 or 3 other kids that are coming with you all the time, that puppy was full. Nice thing about it was, you could, if you were hungry, there was always something in there you could eat because somebody left some box of something in the back of some seat, and so we always laughed about that.
Can you really briefly talk about your political beliefs?
Sure. I am a fiscal conservative, so I'm a merit-based person. I think you promote people based on the job that they can do and the investment they provide in terms of initiative. You can't get caught up till you learn what to cut out, and that means you have to figure out how to use your time in ways that will make a difference. So those people stand out. I call that the last 10%. You can do 90% of the work and think you can settle, and it's maybe what most people do. But the outstanding person is going to do the last 10%. They're going to put the shine on the apple before they give it to the teacher, instead of giving the teacher an apple out of a bowl. And they're going to make a difference, and it's going to be consistent on a daily basis. Those are the people you want to work to really grow your teams with. Those are the people you want to have learn to lead, how to model that to others. And so if you're fiscally conservative and you're meritocracy kind of base, which I am, and you're also then socially conservative, and that for me is very simple. I believe the Bible is absolutely the Word of God, so I'm never going to take and I have an argument with anything that's scriptural. That's my center core belief. So that doesn't mean that you make everybody and expect everybody to comply to that. That means what you do is that's the worldview through which you live to other people. And a Christian worldview is very, very healthy for a city or anyone because of the fact that your biggest tool is unconditional love, which means high acceptance, not requirement, high acceptance. And the other is forgiveness. So those two attributes allow you to really embrace the needs of an entire society. So anything that is legal, in the state of Florida and are legal in the United States of America, I'm going to defend the right of that person to be able to have those positions. They may not align with my own personal Christian worldview, but my responsibility is to love in a way that attracts people towards that truth.
Now, how did you arrive at your political beliefs? Did your parents talk about politics a lot when you were a kid? Or?
I might say I grew up in the late 50s and early 60s, and so we were going through integration and all of the racial issues that we were having as a nation. And so my parents were super helpful for me in terms of having an appreciation for people and having an appreciation for those battles and those struggles. We have a lot of mistakes we made as a nation growing through integration. And we have a long way to go on some of those fronts still today, but that is never quitting. But it isn't related only to race. It relates to lots of people. It relates to the way immigrants come into our country. The key is that you do all of these things legally, and that people that have these privileges that come accept those as privileges and work to take the steps they need to take as well. Entitlement is what kills us. The minute you start to think that the government owes you something and you don't have to be the productive person for the society in which you live, you start the downhill spiral, because the government can never produce enough benefit to entitled people to supply for their needs. We weren't designed to do that. We were designed to work. We were designed to create. We were designed to add to and meet the needs of other people. That's why we're here. And so that requires discomfort, broken expectations, disappointment, all the things that are just part of life, and learning how to bounce back from those. In fact, I have a book that I keep here when I have a problem with that, with people that I love, which is called Building Balance. When you start to think everybody owes you something else instead of you bouncing back from being disappointed in what has happened, you're going to make a mistake. This is a book by a guy named Marcus Warner, who I have a lot of respect for, and it works wonderfully as a tool on how to become much more resilient.
What do you think of the current state of the political world? There seems to be so much more division now. Was it always like that, or is this more now? How do you think social media, the internet, 24-hour news cycle kind of affected that?
Well, I think it's an excellent question, and there's no question that what you just said at the end is yes, I do think that. We went, let's review history. We're the first nation in the world that self-governed. We can forget that. Every other nation was resolved by conquest. Somebody conquered somebody. That is a I win, you lose scenario. We were a nation that said, let's not do that, let's use civility and moral values. And they were the Judeo-Christian ethic moral values that were centerfold in this, to create a self-government in which we had the civility to talk about ideals and principles we wanted to achieve and create the government that would protect those. That's what the Constitution is. That's what the Declaration of Independence required and stated as a vision statement. So we have gone from where that self-governance and centeredness has worked very, very well, to where social media started to silo us and take us to an algorithm of agreement that we're in that makes us feel like if people aren't in my algorithm, they need to be canceled. And canceling is never civility. Canceling is the very opposite of civility. Civility has and entertains discussion. It challenges ideas. It asks questions. Well, if we did that, how would we pay for it? And if we can't answer the how would we pay for it question, then are we good?
Yes.
If we can't answer the how would we pay for it question, then we're going to be in trouble. The reason that civil discourse matters in this nation is it's the whole premise by which we started, but it assumes several things. It assumes a triangle. It assumes a triangle that there is a deity, okay, and that there is an ultimate source to which we're accountable, all through our founding documents. It assumes the fact that there's values that are pretty standard, that people would recognize, are values that most people would accept, that are norms. So those values would be part of what we have as law, and the values that aren't are part of what we make, murder and stealing as violators of those laws. And the third part of it is that we would have communication and civility in that triangle. When we break off any one of those three things in the triangle, we cease to be able to be a culture that accomplishes the very way we existed. We're not in it to win it. We're in it to find the thing that matches the center needs best for all people. That means somebody's going to be disappointed here, somebody's going to be disappointed here. If you think this is the only way it can work, then you'll, one, never see that happen, and it won't. And number two, you will align yourself only with intolerant people, whichever end of that spectrum you are on. Intolerance is the antithesis of who we are. Illegal immigration is the antithesis of who we are. There's a process, and you go through the process to become a person who wants to live and become citizenship. We have a process for that, and we have ways to do that. That's how most of our families all got here, for goodness sake. So we do that through laws that don't burden society, don't rape society, literally, and don't take advantage of people with total entitlement expectations without contributing anything back. So what we're seeing happen, the slowdown and the recentering that we're going through right now, is part of a slide we have done unabated towards kind of progressive foolishness and to a more responsible accountability to the nation that we were originally founded to pursue.
What do you think of President Trump?
Love to duct tape his mouth on a lot of issues and comments that he makes. He makes a lot of very sarcastic remarks that may be a little funny to him and are assumptive that other people know really what he means. It's not that. I am a friend of Mike Pence, and so I know Mike because he grew up in the same town that I lived in
Which is interesting because I know another guy who's friends with him too.
And Mike had super respect for President Trump until September 6th. Was it September 6th?
January 6th.
I'm sorry. Wrong month, wrong time. Until January 6th, Mike really loved working alongside him in a lot of mutual respect. He's very tolerant in quiet spaces, very interested in listening to everybody at the table in terms of their viewpoints. Respectful kids, raised well, and so Mike's a good judge of character. I would just tell you that. So it's interesting to have that inside story and knowledge, and that probably what gives me more grace for some of the things that President Trump says. I would just use a recent example. I thought the Charlie Kirk Memorial was super honoring on Sunday that was just done in the wake of Charlie Kirk's assassination. The only inappropriate speaker was the last speaker, which was President Trump, and only in as much as there's a slide from his prepared remarks to it becomes kind of a political rally, and I look at all the things we have done. That's not a political rally. There's an appropriateness in that moment. It's honoring a person. It's keeping your comments in that vein. I'm disappointed in what happened January 6th. I'm disappointed in the comments that I hear him make. Now, put all that aside. That's a box. Go to policies. I think he's done a brilliant job. We have the most controlled immigration right now going on that we have had in almost 20 years. He has used tariffs as a way to start to bring back jobs to America that we have let slide because we let other people put tariffs on us while we did nothing in response. He's a businessman that recognizes you have to be economically strong to do anything else with a success on a longer period of time. And he's restoring those values to America. And I remember when he started on the tariffs, and we're only 9 months into this, Mike, when he started the tariffs and the negotiations, people saying it's going to ruin our economy, we're going to watch inflation go spiraling, people are going to not be able to buy products that come from overseas at affordable prices, yada, yada, yada. The stock market's going to fall, it's going to be, doomsday. We've had 26 record markets between the S&P, NASDAQ, and Dow Jones in the last 9 months. 26 times. Those have all gone to their record levels. Our economy is stronger than it was 8 years ago right now. We have interest rates that are topped, and we're starting to trim back down. And we don't want to trim too much, because you trim too much in interest rates and you accelerate inflation again. So the next big job we have to do is reduce M2, our monetary supply, so there's less dollars in the marketplace, because that's really the contributor to high prices more than even the interest rates and inflation. He understands all that. We have the ability to be able to have good policies that protect a broad group of people without going crazy on some of the DEI issues that we had done. Now, that can be painful for some citizens, and that can seem reversing for some citizens. But as long as it's merit-based, everyone has the same opportunity to go after it the way that anybody else does. I don't mean that the playing fields are always equal. I don't mean that you get started out with the same opportunities. I think there are some places where people, because of family structure or absence thereof, are going to be have a longer curve to get some of those basic values and hard work ethics in place, because they get sidetracked by people who may be less traditional in the way they earn money, and drugs are a huge example of that. So you can look at somebody who's making a lot of money doing drugs and say, why would I go to school when I could do that? And that's going to take away hope, dreams, persistence, majoring in something that you're good at and want to do, looking at your own giftedness because of an absence of work desire. That's wrong motivation.
Have you ever met him, President Trump?
I've been in the room with him. I haven't ever shaken his hand. And it was with 135 other community leaders with the National League of Cities, and he was very affable, not kind of what you see. We see, and particularly on the more liberal media side, we see the worst of the comments and the toughest bite possible that's saying typically, and it's hard to measure him, but he says some audacious things he shouldn't say. So I'm not going to defend him.
Have you ever met a president?
Yes, I met President Bush, both actually, and Reagan and Lyndon Johnson when I was 10 years old. Lyndon Johnson picked me up at an airport and held me in his arms. He was a big guy. I just remember with his hat on, he was really high, and he held me while he talked to my dad. I was with my dad, and he's kind of just holding his arm while they're talking, and reached in his pocket and gave me a card to go to to observe in the balcony one of the sessions of Congress, which I put in a little notebook, which I still have today.
That's awesome.
You know, and he was wonderfully warm and friendly, just really a neat guy.
Yeah, the only one I got as close to him as I am to you was Gerald Ford. Once up in New York, I didn't actually get to interact with him, which I always regret it.
Mm-hmm.
I always kind of liked him. I thought he was
Yes.
treated kind of unfairly because of what happened with Nixon. And then Saturday Night Live made him look like a bumbling buffoon
Right.
because he fell down the stairs a few times, which he was one of the most athletic presidents we ever had.
Mm-hmm.
And he doesn't get nearly as much credit as I think he should.
You are absolutely correct.
You said you're friends with Mike Pence. How do you know him?
From Columbus, Indiana, when we were in high school. And so the Pence family was a family that were fuel wholesalers. And so we had a farm and a tank of fuel that our company would fill.
Did you see him when he visited here? I think he came to Lakeland some years
He
ago.
did. He came to Lakeland. I saw him, and I was on the front row. He didn't see me. And but it was in the latest part of the campaign, and he was tired. He was very, very tired, and he stopped for a short period of time. We were out there for several hours before he came, and I just wanted to say, to connect, to say hi, but didn't happen.
Okay. What would say is your proudest moment as mayor?
I think the things that we have done in the city of Lakeland that make the most difference some have happened early on. One was when we were in the George Floyd era. Our community knew that we had a lot of interest in protecting the interests of all citizens, and we did a good job in moving our Civil War statue from the center of our downtown to putting it into our Veterans Park, from, which is where we celebrate or honor the men who died in wars, and that's where that one belonged, not in the center of downtown. Didn't eliminate it, we moved it, so that it depended which side of that you wanted to be on, because it was one of the many statues that were put up during the Jim Crow era that were really put up in the cities that did the most lynchings. And so it was not a commendable piece from everyone's perspective. We then also finally capped our hospital lease, which was made, that was an important change that we made. We've refinanced the city twice in terms of our loans to lower interest costs, almost on a $16 million basis. We over 10 years of savings. We took a coal power plant down, which is important on a long-term basis, and that's hard. It's just tough to go through all the job changes that are affected by that, as well as just getting rid of the steel, the immense amount of that property. We have just done a lot of things to try and use our resources in ways that it extends more benefits to people. So, for example, this would be true in Parks and Rec, and adding additional park areas in the city where we need to have them, and improving the amenities in those. We've helped the airport grow a great deal, worked on bringing Amazon here, and we're now one of Amazon's best air hubs, and there's 8 of them, and we are continuing to grow with that, and they're wonderful to work with, and brought a Bello Airlines here more recently. Our airport is one of 67 airports in the United States that has a Cat 3 ILS, which is you could take an equipped plane down to the runway in absolute blind fog, and it'll land on the pavement. And you would think there's many more airports like that in the United States. There aren't, but that's because this airport has really strategic location between Tampa and Orlando. And so we expect this airport to have some mid-sized growth over the next 20 years ahead.
When you were a young boy, what did you want to be when you grow up?
I thought about, we all thought about being firemen. I don't know if maybe you did, but I thought about being a fireman for a period of time when I was a little guy, a lawyer, and a businessman, and I ended up in the businessman arena. For a period of time in my high school years, I even considered thinking about being a pastor and of a church, but somehow in the process of all that, the business guy won.
Did you ever believe in Santa Claus?
Oh yeah, Santa Claus was good for me through, I think, at least 7 years old. I had an older sister, and that's my experience, by the way, as a 2 kids and a dog family, not my family.
What do you know now as mayor you wish you would have known on day one?
I wish I'll tell you the skills that I think it enhanced more. Listening and loving unconditionally. Those 2 things. So everybody has a perspective in life that is of high value to them, and it might be dramatically different than your own. It's important to understand what that perspective is and why those values are important to them. And I think in the process of listening well, you love better, because you appreciate the pain that some people have gone through, the trauma that may have happened in their life, and you recognize, if I'd gone through some of that, I'd probably have that same perspective too, even when there might be some solutions that they cannot see today. So our responsibility in that really is to work to provide hope in lives like that. You lose hope and trust, and you become cynical. So if you don't have trust that people really have your best interests in mind, if you don't have hope that there's really a pathway forward for you to be able to achieve things through, and a lot of that is spiritually centered, clearly. But even if you don't want to do it spiritually centered, you want to do it out of the sheer fortitude of your character, you can push yourself towards something that provides hope. Hope is a joy center contributor. If I don't have hope, and on our frontal lobe of our brain we have a joy center, literally a joy center, that's mappable. You can see in an MRI, it's more white tissue, the more joyful a person is. It's less white tissue, the less joyful they are, and it can change in a person's life. So it actually joy creates itself and reinforces itself. The happier you can be, the more positive you can be, the more purposeful you can be, the more hope that you can have is going to create more joy. The more your joy centers up, the more your tolerances are up. A tolerance of people that are maybe impatient, tolerance of people that are not being very understanding, all those kinds of things. Because your joy center causes that resiliency we talked about earlier. Resilience and joy are super important. So that's why trust and hope are so important. Our behavioral health problems are primarily because we have isolated ourselves through social media into silos. We have, and silos of disagreement. We have ceased to have hope, and we become cynical about society, and we lose joy. And once we lose joy, we lose the ability to be able to be vital, contributing citizens.
Any regrets in the job so far? Any regrets that you have in the job so far?
I'd love to do it longer. I have to make this choice to be able to invest in those kids. And so my biggest regret would be it's going to be forward, unplugged. I love what we've been able to accomplish.
As a public official, do you have to deal with threats a lot?
Yeah,
to yourself?
Yes, we've had that. And we had during the COVID era when we did masking, and you have to rewind and go, we didn't know exactly what we were dealing with when we had COVID. It's easy to do this 2020 after the fact, but we didn't have vision for 2020 then. And I had been chairman of our hospital board for 3 years and on that board for 12 years before that, so I knew the load at the hospital and the deaths we were having and the trailers we were pulling up as reefers to hold corpses because we didn't have enough room in our morgue to be able to have them. And so when we moved to masking, there were hugely upset people about that. And I don't regret it. My wife, so they pee in front of your house and with bullhorns and all that kind of thing, and I let them stay there. I didn't ever ask the police to move them or anything, and unfortunately for my neighbors. But my wife would make them chocolate chip cookies and take them out and give them to them because my wife's a superstar, and she just, and a very joyful person. And so she abated that to some degree. But and then we had, during that era, there would be threats occasionally that would come through LPD. You can't run in fear of those things, otherwise you won't do your job. My greatest days aren't going to be on this planet anyway. They're what's ahead. So death is an opener for me, and it's not going to be something I run from.
How did COVID change the world around you?
Well, I think it gave us a greater awareness of cleanliness, of things we had to make not as common. I think it gave us an opportunity to get to online levels of work and meetings and communication accelerated by decades, perhaps, that we would have taken a lot longer period of time to get to. Some of that has created some issues of people not wanting to come back to work. But so what? If those people don't really want to come back to an office, if they don't want that daily accountability or the need to have to sit at a desk or do what it is that they did at that office, that's fine with me. Let them find jobs that they want to find, that they allow them to work from home. And maybe you can say, well, they don't work the 8 to 5 job that they're supposed to. No, they probably don't. They probably work a 10 to 10 job or a 10 to 6 job because they work in spurts and do other things in between. The question is, what's their output? Is their output at the level of output that you'd want to be able to have from someone in that job? Because now we can eliminate a desk space, air conditioning, lighting, and all the things that would be expenses. And so this has been a downturn for office space. For office space, you have to readjust where companies don't need as much officing as they used to have. But we'll move into that, and we'll move into those opportunities. That's the economic curves that take place, and that creates lower prices, which create more desire for people to be in those spaces. But there's a leveling out period through this. I think it'll be a decade before we're through it all. But all in all, I think there's always good from things that are bad, and there's some good outcomes from that. Horrible in terms of the number of deaths, particularly older people, that took place that were irreversible. We put them on ventilators, and
Yeah, I know my father died from it, so I know.
Yes, so you know the pain of that, and it was real. So you can't say, oh, well, we don't need to be more careful. We had to be more careful. We didn't know what we were dealing with.
You know, couldn't even see him in the hospital or nothing. I never even saw his body before I got cremated.
Yeah,
So
hard,
It
painful.
was pretty quick. What about hobbies? Do you have any hobbies?
Family, photography, travel. Those are all probably my top three. I love riding bikes. Just investing in people, spending time. I like working with my hands. I'm a city boy today that works, which is I have farm boy level tools. So one of the things I'm going to do, and I'm starting to get some of the stuff put in my garage, and I'm ordering it now, is create a shop in my garage, which I've wanted to do for 20 years, and I just can never get to it because the load of kids and responsibilities has been too much. And I just want to fix things for people and have some opportunities to play with tools and teach my grandkids how to make things and fix stuff.
What's a typical day in the office for you?
I typically am here around 7:30 to 8, and then I leave around 5:30ish. But in the process of that, we will have a whole array of things. So it is meetings with people, it is policy planning on how we can avoid discord when we're trying to propose an ordinance or something that we need to get done. I had great advice once from Adam Putnam, who ran for governor here and was the
Yes, I met him a couple times.
Ways and Means in DC. Adam is brilliant, and I have consummate respect for him. But I said to him, if you were governor and you got a bill on your desk that you had to veto because of personal values, that you say, I cannot sign this bill, I'm going to veto it, would you do that? And he said, if I had a bill that got to my desk that I had to veto, I'm not a good governor. A good governor will have worked on that bill way, way earlier, made sure there's good bipartisan effort in it, in its construction, making sure we're meeting the right needs. And that's really what I probably do the most. If there's, everybody has some kind of a superpower. If I have a superpower, it's collaboration, and it's finding middle ground and helping people with disparate interests find a way to make something happen. That's the kind of thing we have to do lots more of. And so you will see that if you were reviewing, most of the things we pass are almost always unanimous passes. Every now and then we'll have something that'll be one or two people will be off against it, and they would have been, no matter how much we had massaged that, even more, because there's just something that's strong enough that they don't like about it that would take it. The civility that we have in our commission is incredible. The mutual respect that we have for each other is marvelous. It's a privilege to see. You do that by listening well.
Now, I know you have a business background, and I know a lot of people who go into elected office also has law. What do you think's better, to be a lawyer or a businessman? Does it really matter?
I think you need to do the thing you're gifted at, and attorneys are important assets in making sure things happen and to protect original intent. I think a lot of times what we forget about when we do contracts is that people have looked at the contract and go, wait, I never said that, and then they go, ooh, yeah, not only said it, you signed it and agreed to it. So that's important because we can be convenient in our memories. And then anticipating what needs to be in that contract, therefore, to provide future protections are important. So you really want creative, not disruptive attorneys that help that whole process.
What has surprised you the most about this job?
The multi-layers of complicity and the complications in making decisions. I think many, many times we think a decision is binary. It's either yes or no, hot or cold, fast or slow, and decisions are rarely binary. They're usually about 6 different levels of impact. And so you need to slow yourself down enough to measure the different levels of impact, because it might be item 5 here that you go, oh, holy cow, if we do this, and I was all for doing this a minute ago, this is a huge problem. This creates something in the future we don't want to have happen. And it's hard sometimes for the public to appreciate that. That's why we're a republic. A republic elects people with presumed competence to be able to study in detail issues to try and make best decisions on behalf of the society they serve.
What's the best advice you can give for young people, not just in general, but also for one specifically who wants to do what you're doing, public service?
Get in the habit of serving early. So servant leader is by far the most effective leader in our culture. So how do you do that? Volunteer. If I'm in third grade, be one of the first people put your hands up to volunteer for anything. Volunteer. Participate. Do the extra work. Pick up trash when you're walking into a room and throw it away. Turn lights off if you're the last one out of the room. Those little habits are all life habits. Those life habits are serial. They grow in their ability and autopilotness to do things that make a difference, that are intentional, that show resolve, that show initiative. And then serve on committees. Learn from, and so many times you can say, oh, it's so boring, I don't want to do that. Well, the reality is there is some boring time on serving on boards, serving on committees, but you're learning something. Be excited about catching nuggets of, I didn't know that, that's interesting. That's really interesting. And recognizing that you have a little nugget bag over here to put things in that you don't even know you're going to use these later in your life, and then these serial experiences which continue to help build your merit and your ability to contribute and your positive attitude and your resilience and joy centering make it possible for then all of a sudden you get in a position where you're asked to do a much more complicated thing, and you can go back to the tools or those nuggets that you learn and go, you know what? This is something we did once earlier, it worked this way. This is something we did earlier that it was a mistake and it cost us because we didn't take this into consideration. And you recognize that your life work is not about the job that you're doing right now, but it's really about your preparation for what you can be doing later based on the experiences and knowledge and exposure to things that you're having along the way. And that's exciting.
What makes a leader a great leader, or what makes a leader a bad leader?
Listening is a huge part of that. So I think a great leader is a person who wants to serve first and expect things to respond later. Your pride is the number one poison that you can drink, thinking that you matter as much as you think you might matter when you don't. Humility, being a servant leader is the best way by far to lead, but it means dying to self a lot.
Tell us a little bit about Lakeland. Why would someone want to move here?
Lakeland is a great mid-sized city that cares a lot about people and honors to a large degree everyone. That's an easy thing to say. It's a hard thing to do. But if you go across the corners of this city for the Main, you will find people feel that they're well heard, they're well listened to, that they're well represented, that people care about them, that governance cares about them, businesses care about them. A city where if you're in the grocery store, people are friendly and generally kind of pretty open with each other, and less judgmental, more receptive. And I think that's what healthy cities do. You're not going to agree with everyone ever. You're going to have some people that honk. They may be from out of town, but in the main, you're going to enjoy the place you live and know that you live in a vibrant place that cares about people and does a good job of providing for the needs that really exist in a short, nimble way.
What's the future hold for Lakeland?
A lot of growth because of our appropriateness, really. So if we can hold our course, this is a city that by 2045 ought to easily be 500,000 people, and and probably could become 1 million people. You have to be deliberate about that. We're working on water needs right now that are 10 years out, and that's how long it takes to get that water. So we're going into the lower aquifer and spending $266 million to get to wells that we can then run through gigantic RO filters so that we can create about 10 to 13 million gallons a day of water out of that, of which 2 to 3 million get pumped back down, which is the sludge of it, and the clean water then goes into the system. That's on this corner. We're doing that around the county, and we're interconnecting. So we really have the ability to enhance our water to sustain the kind of growth we expect.
Do you ever think it comes at a time when a city should try to limit growth if there's just too much of it?
I think it's like holding a plywood board on a tsunami. You're just going to get flattened. So one of the two things needs to happen. Either you find a place that has more room for you if it's just too much growth, or you figure out how do we grow smart. And, would be smartly, but what does smart growth look like? Where do we put things, where do we not put things? Where do we reserve parks? And so that we anticipate it isn't going to be like it was. But if you go back to the people that talked about, the good old days, the city was short lots of amenities that people want today. And there's a difference in the expectation levels of people today. When I was a kid, there was a single worker, which is generally the father. The mother was the nurturer of the family, and she didn't work. And we didn't have a lot. We lived simpler. Life was less accoutrement based. Today we have two people working. They're making money. They want a nicer house. They want nicer cars. They want nicer this. They want nicer that. And then what happens in the course of that is the costs of what we have start to drive themselves up. So we are to some degree to blame for our own housing prices and rental prices, because we're also in facilities that people wanted to have pools and other things that made it nice. And so culturally, our dependency on stuff is probably a little high. And if we can learn to live a little more conservatively, it's interesting to go to countries like in the Netherlands, to go to Norway or Sweden and watch how much people walk, how much simpler life is. Just some of the strip-offs that we don't have here today, and to recognize that culture's happy as a lark living like that. So we race ourselves a little, we push ourselves a little in terms of expenses, and I think we need to be aware of that.
Give me one moment, I need to switch this battery. But I wanted to ask you, how do you balance between growth and make sure you have enough open space and green spaces?
Well, it's important. We want to have a park within 5 miles of anybody, and so we work on that. You want to have corridors that are wide, but not streets that are wide. So this is a different change, by the way. The way you slow traffic down is that you don't have big, wide intersections for semis to be able to turn and all that kind of thing. You keep them a little tighter. You slow it down by narrowing up the lanes. So we're doing a project in our area called Dixieland, which is a lane realignment. Orlando did that with the Edgewater area, and so in that area, and so that you take traffic that was ripping through there at 45, 50 miles an hour, and you get it down to 30, so that it's safer for people and you can have more shops and increase the amount of density you do in some of the existing areas. I just recently returned from Japan, and I watched how they manage density in unbelievably tight ways, but they do with less property. But they're mega managers of tight spaces. And we just have to recognize we have an opportunity to do the balance that you're suggesting, and we work hard at doing it. And one other way you're going to do that is by having many cells of power at places you can grow something that it pulls in a lot of electricity, and that might be manufacturing or even a GPU from some kind of an AI computer base that you can create around those areas prior to nuclear to be able to support some of those in new and innovative ways, and we're working on one of those right now.
I just want to ask you a couple words, what they mean to you. Honor.
Honor comes from honoring others first.
Duty.
Your responsibility and your accountability to do what matters most.
Family.
A commitment beyond yourself to people who you want to recognize are the only things that last forever. There's two things that last forever: people and the Word of God. So people, the number one source you have for being able to input lives is your family.
Loyalty.
It is sticking by someone during their difficult times when they are going through something that maybe is a one-off for them, but they want to get reestablished and do the right things, and you remain loyal.
Would that be the same definition for the word love?
Yeah, I think love is something you do that's unconditional in the truest sense of love. So that means no matter what happens, I think the most important thing we understand in our relationship, personal relationship with God, is that there's nothing I can do that would make him love me any less. And when I really come to grips with that and I realize he loves me 100%, and there's nothing that I could do that would make him love me any less. Jesus died on the cross for us. You can't love anybody more than that. And so that being the case, does that move me more towards wanting to honor him and live for him in a pleasing way, or does that make me want to take advantage and live lawlessly? It moves me in a more responsible way.
Patriotism.
Standing by your nation first and recognizing that it's the oxygen mask in an airplane. You put it on first, then you put it on the kid. Patriotism recognizes that we protect America first and make America strong, and then we can be supportive of other nations. There's no nation in the world that's ever provided more opportunities for freedom for any other countries than the United States, and there's no nation in the world that's ever rebuilt their enemies' places that bombed us and that we bombed during the war and rebuilt them than America.
Evil.
It's real, it will always be. And so evil undermines and evil's satanic at some base level. And so you don't ever want to be surprised by the presence of evil, and you don't want to be surprised by the fact that sometimes you want to be evil to someone else, because that's part of our base nature. The decision is to run from that. So that's a matter of our feet. My predecision about evil in life is run the other direction. So my great example of that is Potiphar's wife and Joseph in the Old Testament. When she tried to tempt him, he fled so fast that she had his coat in his hand. That's a predecision that he made, that I'm not going to get entrapped in this scenario. I'm going to run. And evil pursues us. There's all kinds of things that can sidetrack. It's like a card dealer where you go take a card, any card. Just take the one that sidetracks you. And evil is a reality of our society. The wonderful thing is that we can have victory over evil by choice.
This might be kind of the same answer to this, but why do you think evil things happen, like the Charlie Kirk assassination?
Well, because people are broken. We're all broken. We're all dependent. We're all in need of a savior, and poor choices. So somewhere in the curve of that individual's life who decided to take Charlie's life, he got sideways on what's reasonable, and civility and all the things we've already talked about. Erica Kirk's response in that memorial service, which is to say, I forgive you, is the most virtuous response to evil that you can witness, and it got to be done on prime time for hundreds of millions of people to see. That's how you respond to evil. You can't be surprised that it exists. And then you work on one other principle. All things work together for good for those who love God and are called according to his purpose. So God's going to take what man meant for evil and use it in a very, very positive way. And we'll see that happen in this. It creates resolve. We don't get resolved by being spoiled. We get resolved by being dependent.
And my final question is, how would you like to be remembered?
As somebody who loved people and really worked hard to try and meet their needs.
Okay, awesome. I really appreciate this, a great discussion, and hopefully maybe you might be willing to do this again in the future.
Okay.
Because I know I'm going to have a ton more questions I'm going to think of after this, and you're a very interesting person to talk to. And I know people really wants to hear what you have to say about things in general.
Okay.
So thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Appreciate your time.